In this video, I would like to talk about my experiences during the times of Hurricane Irma back in September 2017, as well as my opinion and how I feel about the hurricane tragedy in my perspective. Hurricane Irma was a very powerful Cape Verde type hurricane that will become the first Category 5 hurricane to strike the Leeward Islands on record, then followed 2 weeks later by Hurricane Maria. Irma was the third strongest hurricane at landfall ever recorded, just behind the 1935 Labor Day hurricane and Hurricane Dorian of 2019. Irma was the ninth named storm, fourth hurricane, and second major hurricane of the hyperactive 2017 Atlantic hurricane season. Irma was also the most intense hurricane to strike the continental United States since Katrina in 2005 and the first major hurricane to make landfall in Florida since Hurricane Wilma, also in 2005, and also the first Category 4 hurricane to strike Florida since Hurricane Charlie back in 2004. The NHC began to monitor a tropical wave coming off of Western Africa on August 26, and on the next day, the tropical wave, which produced a large area of deep convection, exited the continent late on August 27. Throughout the next 2 days, showers and thunderstorms associated with the wave became greatly organized and consolidated into a low pressure area, as the system passed just south of and then through the Cape Verde Islands on August 29. This was something that occurred before, just after Hurricane Harvey hit Texas a few days earlier, as a low-end Category 4 with 1-minute sustained winds of 130 miles per hour. I had personally saw coverage of the hurricane on the news, and this was something that in which I felt a bit scared, because at first I thought that Hurricane Harvey didn't hit anywhere yet, and that it was going to hit Florida. But no, I was wrong at the time, because when the media was reporting over Hurricane Harvey, it had already landfall in San Jose Island, and then later Rockport, while the storm stalled near the Houston metro area. I would nonetheless go on about my days in school, where I would be acting cringe among my classmates, as well as making cringy videos that I now regret making. And while at home, I would continue to play Roblox on my computer, like always. Regardless of what I did in those times, let's get back to the hurricane itself, since I didn't really do much to begin with, while the hurricane was still early in its life. So anyways, around the same time Hurricane Harvey made its final landfall west of Cameron, Louisiana with winds of 45 miles per hour, Irma had finally formed, as the NHC would later begin to issue advisories on the system. Strengthening was expected on Irma due to warm sea surface temperatures and low wind shear, with only dry air attempting to hinder the intensification of the storm. The storm moved westward due to a mid-level ridge over the eastern Atlantic, as the storm will begin to develop upper level outflow, as an anticyclone became established over the system, with new bending features becoming more evident in the satellite images. Early on August 31st, and central dense overcast and the eye feature developed, which meant that Irma had now intensified into a Category 1 hurricane, which was 30 hours after the storm initially had first been formed. The mid-level ridge to the north of the storm slightly weakened, causing the storm to curve west-northwestward. The hurricane would then undergo rapid intensification after reaching hurricane status, becoming a Category 2 hurricane at 6 p.m. UTC, and then later a major hurricane at around midnight UTC on September 1st. So far, the hurricane's intensity had increased by 65 miles per hour in only a 48-hour period, which is something that only 1 in 30 Atlantic hurricanes achieve. After being a major hurricane for about 30 hours, the system weakened slightly back to a Category 2, midday on September 2nd, midday UTC, most likely from dry air and eye wall replacement cycles, with the eye sometimes being obscured and deep convection lining the eye wall therefore making the eye appearing much weaker. Meanwhile, Irma began to move west-southwestward under the influence of a strong high-pressure area to the north. The next day, Irma would re-intensify into a Category 3 hurricane at midday as it continued to move on a southwestward direction, still under the influence of the ridge. Early on the next day, the eye would now begin to increase in size and improve in appearance, while deeper convection surrounding the eye became more symmetrical. The hurricane would also at the time move into warmer sea surface temperatures, as it was now approaching the Leeward Islands. This will be when the hurricane would again undergo rapid intensification, reaching Category 4 intensity at 6 p.m. UTC, and then later Category 5 status around 18 hours later. Irma would also grow in size and become more symmetrical, becoming more and more annular, with mesovortices being observed within the eye, which meant that the hurricane would continue to intensify. 6 hours after initially reaching Category 5 status, the hurricane peaked at 180 miles per hour. It was now at this time when news had now started to forecast for a major hurricane landfall in Florida, to which indeed fact happened. At first, I simply did not know about the severity of the situation until just after my mom picked me up from school and told me about the hurricane that it was going to landfall in Florida. In almost an instant, I started to freak out, and this will be when I started to become paranoid about the hurricane. Because of course, at the time I thought that Hurricane Irma would not only pass through my home but also cause a long-term outage, severely damaging my home, and we would then be forced to relocate elsewhere inland. Henceforth, shortly after hearing of the said information, I would then make a very short cringy video about the situation, where I would also overreact about Disney World also being hit, and all of us literally going to die in the wrath of the storm, which actually never happened. I survived the storm, so did my parents and my dog. I also overreacted about all of Orlando, including us, having to move elsewhere and become homeless forever. In that video, I was also proven wrong, because at least where I was at the time, the intensity of the hurricane was not as strong as it used to be, while it was hitting the island of Barbuda at peak strength. Speaking of which, around the time the hurricane landfalled in the island of Barbuda, the hurricane would reach its minimum barometric pressure of 914 millibars. This was the lowest barometric pressure in the Atlantic Ocean since Hurricane Dean back in 2007. The hurricane would continue to maintain its peak intensity until shortly after striking St. Martin, to which it occurred sometime before midday UTC on September 6. 5 hours later, Irma would then strike Virgin Gorda, still at 180 miles per hour, though the pressure of the hurricane rose slightly by the time the hurricane made its landfall on Virgin Gorda. After the hurricane moved away from the Virgin Islands late on September 6, the cyclone passed roughly 60 miles north of Puerto Rico. This was now when forecasts significantly increased the chances of the hurricane hitting Florida, as the storm moved northwestward. Irma paralleled the northern coast of Hispaniola throughout the day on September 7th. Meanwhile, another eye-wall replacement cyclone began to take place, as another reconnaissance aircraft determined that Irma to have an elliptical eye structure later that day, despite the hurricane's wind field continuing to expand. Because of this, the hurricane had now weakened to a Category 4 hurricane as it passed south of the Turks and Caicos Islands early on September 8th. This had ended a 60-hour contiguous period of Irma maintaining Category 5 intensity, as only the 1932 Cuba hurricane had lasted longer as a Category 5 in that intensity for 78 consecutive hours. Also early on September 8th, the eye of the hurricane had made landfall on the island of Little Inagua in the Bahamas with winds of 155 miles per hour and a pressure of 924 millibars. Due to a subtropical ridge forming to its north, the hurricane became moving more to the west and slowed down in general movement. As the Iowa replacement cycle had completed, the hurricane would re-intensify back into a Category 5, shortly afterwards making landfall in Cayo Romano, Cuba at 3 a.m. UTC on September 9th, at Category 5 intensity with winds of 165 miles per hour. This made Irma only the second Category 5 hurricane to strike Cuba at that intensity since the 1924 Cuba hurricane, both which had identical wind speeds at landfall. As the eye of Irma moved inland along the coast of Cuba, gradual weakening ensued because of land interaction, with the eye filling in with clouds and the intensity falling back into a high-end Category 2 status later on September 9th. Now, on this day, after my father was given permission by his boss to shelter in at his workplace at the time, which was a Wyndham hotel close to Disney Springs, I would gather our belongings as well as our dog to shelter in at the hotel for the duration of the hurricane. This would be when almost all of the businesses in our city had closed down for the duration of the disaster. Before arriving at the hotel, we would gather a quick lunch at Burger King until getting into the hotel, as my father already had the keys for the hotel room we were staying at, which unfortunately was at the first floor of an outdoor garden view hotel room outside of the main high-rise building that I was expecting to get. From this moment on, we will only go out of the hotel room simply to occasionally walk around and explore the place, but also walk our dog to do his business, of course, because my father was a housekeeping manager for the hotel at the time. My mother and I were even allowed to eat at the employees-only dining room, which was a small self-service for the employees to enjoy. However, the food that was being served to the employees was something that I did not like that much, yet I continued to eat their food anyways, since all the other restaurants near us were closed down. And also since this was pretty much the only option of food we had at the time. Throughout the day, my dog would start to become more scared every time we left him behind and even barked, and on several occasions peed on the crate that we forced him to stay in throughout the duration of the disaster. Since the last vacation we went on with our dog was on a small cottage located in Longboat Key. That was when he not only peed in my bed, but also in my parents' bed, since he was scared and mad that we left him to go for the beach where dogs weren't allowed to go to at the time, back in July 2017, earlier that year. Now back to the hurricane. As Irma had now slowed down, moving northwestward towards Florida, in response to moving around the southwestern edge of a subtropical high to its northeast, and a low pressure system that was located on the continental United States. Moving along the Florida Straits, which contains sea surface temperatures near 88 degrees Fahrenheit or 31 degrees Celsius, allowed Irma to quickly re-strengthen, re-attaining Category 4 status on September 10, while located about 65 miles off of Key West, Florida. As deep convection improved and the eye becoming better organized. This would now be when the NHC determined that Irma would maintain its intensity before making landfall in the state later that day. Furthermore, the hurricane's wind field increased in size with hurricane-force winds spanning 80 miles off from the center and gale-force winds spanning 220 miles in diameter. Shortly after we woke up after 8 a.m. on September 10th, we would now start to experience heavy rain and wind associated with the hurricane. Now, even though I did not want to leave the room because of how intense the storm was for us, we still left the hotel room nonetheless, because of course we anyways had to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner and walk our dog for a while, since we did not even consider bringing our own meals at the time too. On that same day, Hurricane Irma made landfall in Cudjoe Key, Florida at 1 p.m. UTC at Category 4 intensity with a pressure of 931 millibars. This was now the first time on record two Category 4 hurricanes made landfall in the continental U.S. within the same season, with Hurricane Harvey having already made landfall around the same intensity in Texas just 2 weeks prior. Wind shear increased and the land interaction caused the satellite appearance of the storm to become more disorganized, and Irma weakened into a Category 3 as it made its final landfall in Marco Island, Florida at 7:30 p.m. UTC and a pressure of 936 millibars. After the hurricane moved inland, Irma began to accelerate to the north-northwest again, while at the same time rapidly weakening due to increasing wind shear, land interaction, and dry air. Throughout the day, as the day further progressed, so did the intensity of the rain and wind in our position at the time. Even during the height of the rain and wind associated with the storm affecting the Orlando metro area at the time, I nonetheless remained calm as my dog continued to cry uncontrollably. It was while we were all asleep that we were affected by minimal hurricane force winds of 75 miles per hour on our position at the time, passing just east of Tampa at the time. After we woke up, it continued to rain in our area. Nonetheless, we continued staying at the hotel as the storm weakened into a tropical storm around 12 p.m. UTC that day as it entered southern Georgia and began its transition into a post-tropical cyclone. Shortly after nightfall, as the storm finally cleared its path and we no longer felt gale force winds at the top of our heads, power issues began to occur at the hotel, where on numerous occasions the power repeatedly blinked on and off due to the damage that the hotel sustained. For example, a gazebo close to a Mickey Mouse shaped garden outside the hotel was badly damaged, and the first floor of the outdoor hotel rooms were deeply flooded. As I was just about to start sleeping, my parents then made up their minds about staying in the room until the next morning, and then decided to come back home to rest just after midnight, all because of power failures. I did not want to get back home at this time, yet I went anyways. Following the initial storm activity after Irma dissipated, even though most businesses opened back up shortly after the hurricane activity, my school continued to remain closed for the rest of the week, as they too may have experienced some damages in their property, or sheltered in some of the unlucky people. And even though the hotel we had stayed at had experienced damage throughout the disaster, our home was fortunately lucky as we didn't even sustain any sort of damage in our home. However, unfortunately, after my school opened back up, several of the Wednesday initially planned to be early release days had to be extended for another hour, simply to make up for the school days lost by the hurricane, as well as October 28, 2017, which was the Friday before Halloween. That was planned to be a holiday, but was instead made up. My school also decided to get rid of the first day of the Thanksgiving holiday, also because of the hurricane, along with MLK Day and President's Day. Yet, fortunately though, none of the days of Spring Break 2018 were affected by the hurricane at all. Alright, so this is all I'm gonna say here. I hope you people enjoyed my side of the story of the hurricane. If you want to listen to more stories or just want to see more videos of me in general, then please consider liking and subscribing. I would greatly appreciate your kind support that you can give out to me. So anyways, this is all I have to say here. So therefore, goodbye for now.